Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison.
The defense, meanwhile, argued the women were willing participants in fulfilling Combs' sexual desires, and that all the encounters we heard about in this trial were consensual. And there you see, after the verdict, Diddy's family celebrating on the streets in New York City, doing push-ups on the sidewalk while others danced. They said a few words exclusively to ABC News, and the attorney for Cassie Ventura also spoke out about this verdict.
Love everybody watching. So happy. Pop's coming home. God bless. God bless the whole world.
What about the other component that we know the judge is very concerned about, and that is your client's propensity for violence? Even you yourself acknowledged that in the closing arguments of the case with what happened to Cassie on the video that the world saw, and in the instances with Jane. How can you reconcile your position now in this motion for bail, that he should be free and is not a danger to the public, when we know these instances happened in the past?
Kid Cudi recounted a chilling incident in which Diddy allegedly lit his car on fire. As more witnesses came forward, a disturbing pattern has begun to emerge. Former employees and associates have described a toxic environment where Diddy allegedly ruled through fear and manipulation.
Vanity Fair, I live an extravagant life, and I make no apologies for it. I'm free as a motherfucker.
Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting his case in court. He's now dangling a jaw-dropping $50 million to try and buy his way out of a Brooklyn jail. The music mogul, once seen as untouchable in the entertainment industry, has been behind bars at Brooklyn's MDC since his conviction earlier this year. Right after the verdict, his legal team made a push for a $1 million bail package, confident they could persuade the court he wasn't a danger. The judge didn't just hesitate, he flat out shut it down. Now Diddy's back with a figure 50 times bigger, gambling that sheer financial muscle might crack the door open. But will it? Or will this play come across as just another desperate attempt from a man whose empire is collapsing under the weight of scandal? For most people, the idea of posting $50 million in bail is unthinkable. For Diddy, it's the kind of move that shows two things: his desperation to get out before sentencing, and the size of the war chest he's willing to burn through to make it happen.
He's in danger. He knows too much. One thing you gotta realize is he probably having a conversation right now with the higher-ups and everybody else to figure out how it's going to work itself out, because he know all the secrets. And if he gets to running his mouth, it could be a bad look.
This is how I really feel, right? Other than him just being a freak. I don't know how you get in that position and do all of this wild. It just leads me to believe you don't have no real friends around you.
Bail isn't meant to be a punishment, it's supposed to ensure you show up to court, but when you're already convicted and just waiting for sentencing, the bar is much higher. Diddy's sentencing date in October is looming. He doesn't want to spend the next 2 months behind bars, and his argument is simple. The crimes he was convicted of aren't violent, and technically he's not wrong. The charges fall under the Mann Act, a century-old federal law prohibiting the transportation of individuals across state lines for sex work or immoral purposes. He was convicted on 2 counts, both related to hiring a sex worker and taking them across state lines. For his defense team, that's an open and shut reason to reconsider bail. If the crimes are non-violent, why treat him like a violent offender? But here's where it gets messy. The court isn't only looking at what the jury convicted him of, they're also looking at everything that came up during trial, even if it didn't lead to a guilty verdict. The prosecution spent much of the trial focused not on the technicalities of the Mann Act, but on painting a broader picture of who Diddy is behind closed doors. And for that, they leaned heavily on the testimonies of 2 women, Cassie, his longtime ex, and another woman known in court as Jane. Both described a pattern of control, violence, and coercion. Cassie's testimony referenced the now infamous 2016 Intercontinental Hotel video, which appears to show Diddy physically attacking her. Jane described her own violent encounters, painting a disturbing picture of how he allegedly maintained dominance in relationships. The jury, however, didn't convict him on those counts. For them, the evidence didn't meet the standard needed to prove crimes like assault or coercion beyond a reasonable doubt. But here's the legal twist. A judge deciding on bail can still factor in that same evidence. Even if a jury said not guilty on those charges, a judge can use those incidents to determine if a defendant poses a risk to others if released. That's exactly what's happening here, and it's why Diddy's $50 million offer isn't an automatic ticket to freedom.
The lead attorney for Sean Diddy Combs is speaking out in his first network interview since Combs was acquitted.
One thing he said, he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
He said that?
He did. He said to me he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
Doing what?
I guess being on stage. You know, and I said, I'll be there.
On paper, the Mann Act doesn't sound like the kind of charge that would keep someone behind bars for months before sentencing. It doesn't require proof of physical violence, but when it comes to bail decisions, the law takes a sharp turn. Federal statutes classify the Mann Act as a crime of violence, not because the act itself always involves violence, but because it's considered a serious federal felony tied to exploitation. That classification matters. Under the bail statute, Diddy now has to clear 2 hurdles, prove he's not a flight risk, and prove he's not likely to commit the same offense before sentencing. The first hurdle seems easy enough. Diddy's offering to surrender his passport, wear an ankle monitor, and put $50 million on the line. The second is where he hits a wall. Prosecutors argue that Diddy's behavior before his arrest shows he's unwilling or unable to change. They point out that even when he knew federal agents were watching him and an arrest was imminent, he allegedly continued hosting the kind of freak-off gatherings that sit at the center of some accusations. To them, that's not just arrogance, it's proof he poses a risk of reoffending if released. And while the term freak-off might sound like tabloid slang, in court it's been tied to allegations of trafficking, coercion, and exploitation. This creates an awkward paradox. For the court, the risk isn't that he'll commit a violent assault before sentencing, it's that he'll commit the exact same kind of Mann Act violation all over again. The $50 million bail request has ignited a firestorm in the court of public opinion. On one side, you have people pointing out that countless nonviolent offenders get bail all the time. They argue that keeping him locked up is excessive, especially when he hasn't been convicted of violence. On the other side, critics say the only reason Diddy's even able to make this argument is because he's rich. For an ordinary defendant without millions in the bank, the conversation would end after the first denied bail request. They point to the 2-tier justice system, one for the wealthy and famous and one for everyone else. For survivors advocates, the stakes are even higher. They argue that letting him out before sentencing would send a dangerous message that with enough money, you can sidestep accountability. There's also the question of whether this fight is even worth it. Legal analysts suggest Diddy could be looking at a sentence as short as 1 to 2 years. With time served, he might be released not long after sentencing. That raises the question, why burn political capital and risk more bad headlines for the sake of a few months of freedom? Some believe it's about more than just the time. Being out on bail allows him to handle personal affairs, work on business deals, and possibly rehabilitate his public image before prison. In other words, it's a strategic move, not just a personal one. One major factor working against Diddy is the judge's own recollection of the trial. During his earlier bail denial, the judge referenced a moment when Diddy's own legal team admitted, during cross-examination, that if the case were purely about domestic violence, he'd be guilty based on the hotel video. That admission, meant to diffuse one part of the case, now hangs over the bail decision like a shadow. Judges have long memories in high-profile cases, and in a situation where public trust in the system is already strained, the optics of releasing someone with those admissions on record could be too much to ignore. Diddy's situation isn't without precedent. Celebrities from O.J. Simpson to R. Kelly have faced similar battles over bail with varying results. In each case, public outrage, media coverage, and the seriousness of the charges played as much of a role as the legal arguments themselves. For R. Kelly, multiple accusers and the nature of his charges kept him locked up despite his resources. For O.J., his post-acquittal legal troubles saw bail granted at times, but under strict conditions and with intense scrutiny. Diddy's case sits somewhere in between, with non-violent convictions but violent accusations that won't go away. In the middle of all this legal back and forth are the voices of Cassie, Jane, and their supporters. They've already endured the trial, the cross-examinations, and the public spotlight. For them, the idea of Diddy walking free, even temporarily, is more than just a legal technicality. It's a symbolic blow, a sign that money and influence still trump lived experience. One women's advocate put it bluntly, if this were anyone else, they'd still be in jail. The system bends for the rich and survivors pay the price. With October fast approaching, the judge has a decision to make. If he grants bail, Diddy's release will dominate headlines and likely ignite fresh protests from advocacy groups. If he denies it, Diddy will spend the next 2 months behind bars, with every day counting toward his eventual sentence. Either way, this isn't just a courtroom drama, it's a cultural one. It's about whether the justice system treats celebrity defendants the same as everyone else, and whether the weight of accusations should matter as much as the letter of the law. The clock is ticking, $50 million is on the table, the world is watching, And in the end, this decision might say more about the system than it ever could about Diddy himself. The next move is in the judge's hands, and one decision could either unleash a firestorm or prove that even $50 million can't buy freedom. When that ruling drops, it won't just shake Diddy's world, it'll tell us exactly how much justice is really worth.